Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to One Idea Away. As you know, on this show, we get into this topic of connection all the time and in many different ways. We love to explore how do we connect more deeply, more truly, more authentically to ourselves, but also how do we do that with others? And so we explore topics, whether it be mindfulness or neuroscience, positive psychology, the exploration of consciousness, as it were. We do that all the time to learn more about who we are and how we are as human beings. But we also look at the journey side of it, meaning that we get to explore people who have put all of these pieces together as well, and how that connection actually looks in their life and in their work and the way that they're really embodying it. Well, we've got a kind of a unique part of that journey today because we've got yet another extraordinary guest who combines that. And that's what really attracted me both to her personal story as well as the professional project, I guess you could say, that she's got underway right now. So what has happened specifically for Chelsea is a way of connecting to herself and very much putting that passion and that purpose into the world in such a way that it creates a really meaningful difference. And I think that's what so many of us are looking for right now, is that when we put all this together, we get fulfillment, we get peace, we get joy. It's a certain way of us being able to show up in the world, showing up authentically and showing up very much uniquely as to who we are. And that's also the very nature of the work that she gets to do. And that's what we're going to get to explore today. And so with that, let me properly introduce Chelsea Hylton, who is a New Orleans-based educator and the founder of the Project Peaceful Warriors, a nonprofit organization developed to bring the tools of trauma-informed yoga and mindfulness to students and educators. Originally from Alexandria, Virginia, Chelsea has been serving students as well as schools through yoga and mindfulness now since 2009, starting in Charleston, South Carolina, where she received her BS degree in physical education at the College of Charleston. Upon moving to New Orleans in 2014, Chelsea began working with charter schools, specifically within the Recovery School District, where she served as both a K-6 enrichment and middle school English teacher. As a teacher, she gained invaluable communication skills and learned pedagogical practices that continue to influence the way that she trains and approaches her work with youth today. Now, it's the work that she's done as the founding director of Project Peaceful Warriors that really drew my attention. And get some of these numbers. She's taught now over 6,000 hours of yoga in the classroom, trained over 500 teachers, and taught over 3,000 students in the city of New Orleans alone. Her work with Tulane School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine was published in March of 2018 in the Journal of Psychology Research and Behavior Management. Chelsea is a 500-hour ERYT, RCYT, and a whole other alphabet soup of yoga teaching credentials. Chelsea aims to create community-minded and user-centered programming that creates safe and healthy learning environments in schools and all students to have equitable access to the tools that they need for success. And with that, Chelsea, I want to thank you so much for being here on One Idea Away.
Thank you so much for having me, Luke. I really appreciate it.
The one of the things that I see out there is the trend with yoga has come up, and it's something that really truly I've just seen break in through to the different level of zeitgeist, I guess you could say, inside of our communities and inside of our society. And that said, so many people still look at yoga as something that is really largely for physical education, physical fitness side of things. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little more about what yoga means to you and how it's informed your journey, because it's created such an impression on you and the way that you really show up and work today.
Sure. And I think, thinking about yoga on a physical level and seeing it as that is not necessarily a bad thing. I think that is what brings people into the practice. And I know for my experience, when I first started yoga, I did it mostly for physical reasons. I started when I was in middle school and high school doing it in combination with athletics, and that was a great way for me to get introduced to it. However, the further I got into the practice, I would say this was about freshman year of college. I had been going through some really challenging times, both with my family. I had lost two very good friends on my high school graduation night in a car accident, and it was just these really challenging emotions, and then navigating a place where I was then on my own, where I came back to the practice, and at first, yes, it was a physical way for me to kind of unplug from my body and what I was experiencing. But the more I continued to practice, and the deeper I got into that, the more I was able to reconnect with my physical body and get onto that emotional level as well. And through that, creating this more now of a mindful practice, of a practice that allowed me to go deeper into the thoughts, the emotions, the feelings, which then connected on a physiological level to what I was experiencing, that then comes back to the physical practice. That was really powerful. And learning more about that and understanding how we hold on to things in the body, I think that the physical practice is really important, but what that helps serve as a vehicle to get you to more of the emotional, the mental side of the practice that we're
Sure.
all kind of seeking eventually down the road.
I think that's always been one of the things that's amazed me about the little bit of yoga journey that I've been on. I wish I could say I'm a slightly steadier practitioner, um, but what's amazed me is from the yoga side as well, from the mindfulness side, is just how intertwined our physical nature is with our emotional, our mental, and our spiritual nature as
Mhm,
well. And I think that's so much of what I'm hoping people are beginning to understand through all of these practices, and specifically yoga, as we discussed it today, is that there's so much going on inside of us. There's so much that we're trying to connect to. And, I'll use myself as an example. As background, I learned to come at things pretty much from a purely cognitive, logical kind of side of
mhm,
things. So the idea of being in my body was like, wow, I actually have a body that's more for, than just recreational use. Uh, and yet when I found that as a new access point to understand and connect to myself in a different way,
mhm,
I started to access things that I had now, no knowledge were actually there and were going on for me. And I
mhm.
guess maybe if you could speak a little bit, to that side of it, maybe specific to what sounds like even a bit of a healing and a reconnecting journey that you went on before it, kind of blossomed into what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a society, we're incredibly disconnected both from our bodies and from our minds most of the
Yeah.
time, and that's just kind of the way that we've been now trained to operate. And I'll speak to myself. I spoke to how I was really, my mat was a place for me to sometimes escape what I was experiencing, the discomfort in my physical body. I also see that in my students. When we think about our ability to regulate our emotions and to regulate our physical body, they're all intertwined, and that disconnection, we don't notice throughout the day where we're holding on to tension when we're holding different things in our body. And it's that lack of connection. And when we are able to reconnect to that, to feel sensations that might be somewhat uncomfortable, but then to have that awareness, it takes us to that deeper level,
Mm.
where we can be more mindful of what we're experiencing, but also then we have the tools to kind of be with that discomfort so we can move through it.
That's really interesting. And I think that's a really cool way of maybe describing something that's going on here that I can just I personally relate to,
Hmm.
is how through yoga and these types of practices, being able to actually become more comfortable with discomfort,
Yeah.
right? And
Right.
we begin that through just a literal physical process.
Right.
There are certain things that my body just has not yet figured out how to do on a yoga
Right.
mat. And so there are some uncomfortable moments that are there. And yet there's something that's more than just metaphor,
Hmm.
right? That's going on there where you're connecting to that discomfort and you're okay with it. And it then starts showing up in different ways in your life.
Yeah.
I guess I still want to talk about the kids that you're working with right now,
Yes.
but I
Yeah.
want to hold on for just a little bit before we go there because I'm so curious to see how this is all working out. Um, Maybe just take me through this part of your journey. When you went to the College of Charleston
Hmm.
for your degree, and it was in physical education, correct?
Correct.
Um, did you know, like, did you have an inkling of where you were going to end up and where you were going to take this? Did you know it was going to be kind of a yoga informed journey, or did it
So
just all continue to evolve?
that's a great question, and it's been more than just my time at College of Charleston. So my whole life, my mom is a special ed teacher. So my whole life I spent time in her classroom, in a classroom, doing all different types of learning. And I knew that in some capacity I wanted to be a teacher, but of course, she was like, don't be a teacher, don't be a teacher. And my sister and I now both work in education, so clearly we're great listeners. So I knew that I wanted to work in education, but not in the capacity of necessarily being your traditional classroom teacher.
Yeah.
And I knew that I had real passion for yoga. I had this real connection. I had the ability to teach it. So my junior year at College of Charleston, I got involved with an organization there called Yoga Kids, which was
Mm.
doing similar to work to what we do now with Project Peaceful Warriors. And I was going into classrooms and I was teaching yoga. And I think that was the real kind of click, or this is it moment for me, where I understood that I also had this ability to connect with students on a level that was different than what they might normally get in everyday instruction. And it was different than what they get, outside of school too, but it was a way to teach things that had been incredibly helpful to me. I saw some of my experiences in my students, and it was a way to deliver something to them that could be really meaningful. And to me, it gave me a platform to teach things that I wouldn't necessarily be able to in a regular classroom.
What was it that then ultimately then took you from Charleston to New Orleans?
I was teaching, and honestly, I was just ready to kind of change things up a little bit.
Hmm.
I had been in Charleston for 6 years. But in that time between graduation and then moving to New Orleans, I spent about 9 months in South Africa. I worked on a healthcare project. I was able to teach surfing, which was really fun. That to me was another way to connect with kids on a physical level. You
Sure.
teach so much through sport and through play and through exploring the body, and just I don't know, I've always really loved that experience. And then I traveled for a bit, and I came back, and it was a really great grounding experience for me, understanding that I could navigate some things on my own, kind of a resurgence of self-confidence. And so from there, I moved to New Orleans. I knew a woman that was here teaching. I had a couple of friends that lived here, and it seemed like the right choice at the time. So, and fortunately, New Orleans is a very different landscape when it comes to education, which a lot of that comes back to post-Katrina and
Yeah.
education. So very open to exploring different things within the school setting.
One thing I just wanted to come back to, because I just so very much agree with it, and I keep hearing it. Interestingly enough, just had a guest a little while ago, Kara Bradley, who spoke to something very similar to this, which is that through sport and through play
Mhm.
and through our physical nature, you can access so much.
Yes.
And while you are very specifically, you're doing this work with kids, and that's the focus of what's going on here. It's part of what I want everybody to remember. It took me uh, 3 decades to
Mhm.
understand that there was a total
Yes.
different physical nature that I could be tapping into, which brought me
Mhm.
back to the days of being a kid and playing in sport, and what I had access to at those times. So there's such a great gateway that creates.
Mhm.
And certainly even as adults, we could use a little bit more play in our
Yeah.
lives.
Yes. I believe it's Daniel Siegel. Play is like the miracle growth for the
Yeah.
brain, is what
Yes.
he
Yeah.
says. Yeah.
Yeah. So you get to New Orleans.
Mhm.
You are involved. I think you said both from an enrichment standpoint as well as doing in classroom
Yeah.
type of work.
Mhm.
At what point does the seed for Project Peaceful Warriors really begin to sprout?
Yeah.
How does it come into existence?
So I was in my first year teaching. I was working at an elementary school, and the way that I was teaching, I had 35 kids, roughly between 30 and 35 kids at a time in a classroom.
Yeah.
And one thing that I realized very quickly is while you can say that I was working with a similar demographic that I was in Charleston, New Orleans is a very different landscape in terms of the culture and what our students experience. We know that students here in New Orleans experience trauma at 5 times the rate of the national average, which means that 1 in 4 students is screening positive for lifetime PTSD. We have a huge incidence rate of community violence, violence within the home. Our poverty rate is incredibly high. The life expectancy, the discrepancy between the uh, wealthiest zip code and the poorest zip code is over 25 and a half years. So not only is this,
Wow.
a financial issue, it's also a public health issue. There's so many different layers to this. But that has such an impact on our students in the way that they are able to access the parts of the brain that they need to learn in the classroom, and all of these different ways that they develop. So very quickly, I realized that my students were not getting the tools that they needed to be successful. And there's many different layers to this. But I knew that I needed a better understanding of what was happening in their brains and their bodies, and what were different ways that I could reach them on another level. And I knew that yoga was helpful, yes, but I needed to switch the lens to teach from a more trauma informed approach. I needed to have a better understanding. Um, and I needed to just explore that whole area i- in more depth. So I had gone to a number of trainings. I had gone to um, uh, do some work out in Seattle with an organization. And on my way back, I remember I had one of those big ruler notebooks that you used to use like in high school. And I just started drawing, which has been my favorite way to kind of create ideas and making like a big spider webs. And I had Project Peaceful Warriors written in the middle. And that was in my first year teaching. So teaching in New Orleans. I sat on that idea and that notebook for probably another 2 years, where I continued to learn and try to develop some ideas. About my third year into teaching, I decided to take the idea to the next level, and I started exploring through different startup organizations, through applying to different fellowship programs. And what I was able to do through that was go through some really great design thinking workshops, and work with an organization here in New Orleans called 4.0 Schools, which really helps to get startup ideas within education off their feet and going, and support around that and coaching. And so after my third year of teaching full-time, I stepped out of the classroom full-time. I still continued to teach, but I kind of made that leap into starting Project Peaceful Warriors full-time. So that fourth year, we were running programs. I was still teaching, now moving into high school, and then a couple of after-school programs. But that was kind of the real launching point for Project Peaceful Warriors, and that was in March, or the end of the school year was May 2016.
Okay. Now, so one thing I want to make mention of, because I think, there's a question I want to lead up to with this as well, is that there are so many of us, and so many that are listening right now. They've had that idea. They've got that notebook, that journal, that
Mhm.
email that they've written to themselves 17 times and keep
Yep.
adding to, all of those types of things. And one of the things that you did in that period of time was you started to then reach out to see what resources were available. You kept learning, you kept moving forward, you kept finding different ways of preparing to
Mhm.
ultimately make that leap. And I think that's one of the things every once in a while we need to hear that part of the story,
Yeah.
because it's not like this idea was born and then it was off and running, right?
No, absolutely not.
It needs to take time. It needs to be cultivated.
Yeah.
I guess the piece that I am curious about is that even with preparation, there comes a moment where you've got to say, okay, this is it.
Yeah.
I'm going for it.
Yeah.
When did that occur for you? When were you able to finally just say, I can't not do this?
I think so. I can't say that there was like one clear
Mhm.
defining moment. I think it
Sure.
was a number of moments leading up to it. I had an incredibly frustrating fall teaching in the classroom, just because there were so many things I was able to implement in my classroom, but then they were all undone outside of that, just because
Yeah.
of the way that school administration was working.
Sure.
And um, uh, uh, just the whole way that the school was set up. And halfway through the year, it was probably right after Thanksgiving, I looked at my now husband and I was like, hey, what do you think of this idea? And he runs a nonprofit as well, because at this point I had shared professionally. I had shared with a couple of peers, but I hadn't talked to him a ton about it. And he was like, I think you should go for it. And I think having that just little extra boost of confidence, it gave me the ability to take that next step. But I knew going into Christmas break of that year that I could no longer be complicit in the systems that were happening within the school setting.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
And I think we at time discount, you're not doing this. I think for us, when we're in the midst of starting things up, we can discount the importance of that support system,
Hmm.
socially and professionally, that
Hmm.
we need to surround ourselves with. And sometimes that system is going to just come together because we're all, some of us are lucky enough that maybe parts of that are already in place for us. And at other times, you exhibited this to the professional side. You've got to cultivate it. You've got to go out and
Right.
create that. And sometimes that needs to be done on the social side as well. And
Hmm.
so it's just something for, everybody to be mindful of, is when you're moving a project forward, whether it's a new business, it's a new career, it's maybe a new relationship, maybe it's something just in a different aspect of your life in some capacity. Surround yourself with people who are going to hold you true to that image, and who
Hmm.
are also going to lend their support in whatever way that they can to you, because it just vitalizes, brings such energy to us in so many different ways, and that's a really, really important part of this process and this journey.
Oh,
uh,
absolutely.
yeah.
Just on that, I think that support is everything in the journey of entrepreneurship, or any journey really can be very exhausting and overwhelming. It can be really exciting. It can be really fun and energizing, but at the same time, it's just this whole new world of to navigate. So
Yeah,
making sure you have people that you can reach out to is incredibly important.
absolutely. And I'll even say that, when you are somebody who's moving an idea forward, and again, through any different means that it may be, if it's entrepreneurship or otherwise, because you're doing something different than the norm,
Hmm.
very isolating,
Yes,
right? Yeah, and that's again another part of the journey that is not usually the publicized part of the journey. It's tough, it's hard work, and there's very few people who really truly understand what you're actually going through. And so
hmm,
the more that you can put support systems around you, that they don't need to understand the whole picture, but if they can support you in different ways, and be there at different times, it makes you feel more connected to what it is that you're doing. And it at times they're going to step in with faith that maybe you may not even have at that particular moment in
exactly.
time as well.
Yeah.
There's a phrase that you use in your work. You used it again before, and I don't want to gloss over it. Trauma informed. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate, because I'm
Hmm.
starting to hear that connected to different things that are out there, different programs and projects that are underway. And I was wondering if you could speak to what trauma informed is meant to mean in the context of what you're doing.
Sure. So for us, it means teaching from a lens that takes into consideration the impact that trauma has on brains and bodies, not just of children, but of communities,
Mhm.
of collective trauma, generational trauma, and having a deep understanding of that and knowing how that then can affect development, how it can affect everyday functioning, how it can affect our ability to create connection with ourselves and with each other.
Mm.
Uh, and then teaching a way that supports that so that we can create a more resilient, a more healing centered space for those individuals who are either in class or participating in whatever it is that we do to kind of cultivate this additional piece of healing. And I think it's really important to understand that when we've experienced trauma, whether that's, and trauma is not uncommon, it's incredibly common. But when we think about the different impacts and the ways that it plays into our lives and how we operate, the stress that it creates on the nervous system,
Mm.
the stress that it creates on the physical body, the stress that it creates on the emotional body, how do we then teach in ways that can support healing that? First, recognizing, that something might not feel great and it could be the result of something else. But how do we create space for healing that is also not triggering? So I think the biggest thing for us when we're working with our students is making sure that we've created a safe space, to make sure that we're also speaking from an asset-based place. So a lot of times when we experience trauma, some sort of our power is taken away from us, whether that's our voice, whether that's our body, um, our ability to have control. So creating a space where they feel like they can step back into their power
Mm.
and kind of create this healing centered engagement. So giving them, we can't change our outside circumstances that are happening without, but we can have tools that can help us feel more comfortable in that discomfort,
Yeah.
that can help us bring us back to a place where we can feel regulated. It can help us to slow down our nervous system. It can help us to re-regulate and reset the body, so that we can access the higher level parts of our brain that we need to operate on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I guess it's kind of funny sometimes how some of these interviews come together because it's not always, I'd love to tell everybody it's more planned in some respects than it
Yeah.
is. Sometimes you just don't know how things are going to tie together. Conversation recently with Dr. Stephen Porges, who talks about polyvagal theory,
Mm,
really gets into the depth of the way in which our nervous systems are working, how that
yes.
relates specifically to the vagal nerve.
Yes.
Um, but the point of me bringing it up is so much of that conversation which you're tapping into is that so many of us don't recognize what's going on inside of our nervous systems, whether we've experienced various levels of trauma or different experiences in our lives have just wired and conditioned us in
Mhm.
certain ways. There's a lot that's going on in that physical part of who we are and
Yeah.
inside of our nervous system. And there are times where it's going to override what we may consciously want it to do.
Yes.
And if we're not aware of that, we may think something's wrong. We may spiral into a stress cycle of some kind or worse. We can go in all these different directions, not recognizing there's actually something else that kind of almost predisposed us or pushed us in that direction ahead of time. And it sounds like, I mean, that's part of, not entirety, obviously, but that's part of what you're describing here is being very aware of that, just like we need to be aware of cultural intelligence,
Mhm.
talking about trauma intelligence in a sense in that regard. We've got to be very, very aware of that, especially with a group of individuals and a group of kids that is so exposed to trauma way above the what I hate to even refer to any trauma as normal,
Normal.
what are considered the usual rates that we would see it at.
Exactly. And when we think about, you think about the nervous system and the brain and its ability to override into this fight or flight mode, this stress response, when we think about the developing brain, we know that we have I like to call it, what I do with my workshop with my teachers, the lizard brain, which is
Yep.
our reptilian brain, and then our wizard brain, our upstairs brain, where we can make good choices. Those pathways aren't developed. So we can't expect for our students, first of all, they're just supposed to be learning how to make those connections, let alone being able to actually regulate them. How can we expect them to adapt to a classroom setting um, when this is something that some adults even have a hard time with?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just want to dive in. I want to hear a little bit. What are one or two of the stories maybe of that you can share with some of the individuals you've worked with. I I honestly I'm holding myself back just from the regard of what I have found and what I keep hearing from a lot of individuals is at times as soon as you figure out the way of being able to connect with a child,
Hmm.
what they are willing to play with and
Yeah.
explore and experience, uh, frankly, the kids do it a lot easier than us adults do.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Just a few. I'm just curious. So, when actually, let me ask it in this context. How have you seen the response change in the work that you're doing since inception? Because you've now been at this for a couple of years, and so
Right.
I'm curious to see the way in which your methods have maybe evolved as you've learned more, but then how the response is changing as you get more and more exposed to all these kids.
Sure. And I think just what you mentioned, like
Mhm.
um, how connecting with a child can change everything. That's 100% where our work is rooted. We believe that relationships are key to any sort of success within our program. So we
Yeah.
really try to focus on that and creating that connection from the very beginning. And that's one thing that we really try to focus on. So we try to keep our programs, and this is kind of shifted. So we used to do programming just once a week, with most of our sites. Now we ask that they do at least 3 times a week so that we can establish that solid relationship with our students,
Yeah.
that they can feel like they're in a safe place where they know somebody. One of my favorite ways well, favorite, I guess, but I think the most impactful way to phrase it is that trauma is unpredictable. It's our job to be predictable
Mm.
as possible so that we can create those relationships in those safer spaces. But when I think about, just the way that our students have now responded, um, we got some really incredible feedback this year. We did our study last year with Tulane. We expanded on it this year, but we were also able to collect some internal data. But this is just a story that's one of my favorites. So we work with early childhood through high school.
Mhm.
So we have ages 3 up until we're with the alternative high school. So our oldest student is 21. And this particular student that I'll speak to, she was 16. She was not in yoga by choice. She was there because she was asked to be by one of the school counseling staff members, and it was a great choice. But for the first 2 weeks of class, she came in and she just threw her backpack down. I'm pretty sure the first day she was just told me to F off, and I was like, okay, we'll give you your space, we'll give you your time, we'll give you what you need. And first 2 weeks was the same thing every day. She came in, threw her backpack down, put her head down on her desk, and I didn't push it. I told her every day after class, if she wanted to talk, I'm here. If she wanted to come early, that's cool too. We can chat. And she was like, no thanks, which is fine. So 2 weeks pass. The next week she comes in, throws her backpack down, and rolls out a yoga mat. And I was like, okay, well, this is progress. Mm-hmm. And for the next week or so, she would continue to come in. She didn't participate in any of the poses, but she would do some of the breathing exercises. She would do the relaxation, and she was there for that. And that was great. And then about halfway through the semester, she started to get really into it. And she would come to class early, ask if she could pick what we were going to do for the day, the poses, the sequence. She'd asked to pick the breathing exercises, and I started hearing from her teachers that they started to see this real shift in her. And it was both within her self-confidence, her ability to regulate in the classroom. She was having a lot of behavioral issues. She was sent out of class a lot, and that started to really dissipate, and she was able to have this sense of self-awareness and self-regulation that created this real shift for her. Also, they saw a lot of, she just was in a more positive mood, which was really great to hear. By the end of the semester, she was leading a class. She said that she was going to sign up for yoga the next semester, which was pretty incredible. And when she graduated in the spring, they did senior exit interviews, and she said, I used to hate coming to school, and mind you, this is the alternative high school, so these students have either been expelled or dropped out of their previous school space. She said, I hated school, but then there was yoga, and yoga gave me a reason to come to class. It helped me throughout the rest of my life, and I can't wait to keep doing it. Wow. So when you think about that and just that journey that she went through, and I think for me, it was a real lesson in being able to respect a student's process, to meet our students where they are and not push anything, because that never gets anybody anywhere. When it's not something that you want to do, but especially when you're doing this kind of work, how do you make sure that you're meeting the needs of your students where they are, letting them come to you rather than trying to force something on somebody?
I mean, it's such a wonderful journey, and to be able to, I guess it's the impact, you one of the words you used there is that ability to regulate or self-regulate. Mm-hmm. But it's that you were learning so many different tools, whether it be through the breathing, whether it be through the asanas that ultimately help us deal with the discomfort that we might be feeling at any given time, the way different things come up for us and the way that we're able to work through it, the way that ends up translating to other areas of the children's lives is extraordinarily impactful. And especially, you see the change that occurred in even just what was that, 6 months?
Yeah, that was 6 months that we had together. But the huge change happened, within, that was the first semester. So 3 to 4 months.
So 3 to 4 months. And I can't even imagine what this is going to mean 3 or 4 years, 3 or 4 decades down the road. And I think that's just the extraordinary trajectory that some of this also then starts to create. The other aspect of meeting a child, meeting anybody where they are on the journey, I think is a really other, very important part of this lesson for all of us. And I think that includes even us meeting ourselves where we are at any given moment, right? There are times where we're going to be very, very open to whatever's going on or what we're trying out or otherwise. And there's going to be other times where we're going to have a whole lot of resistance around it. I'm not saying go run away from it, but I am saying, have some of that compassion, have some of that patience. And, I'll use myself. There are days where I sit for meditation, and within 60 seconds, I know, oh, this is not going to be a fun one.
Yeah.
This one's going to push me. And there are days where, you know what, I may decide if I can breathe just for the next 5 minutes, because that's where I am today. I'm not going to be able to sit for 20 or 25 minutes or half an hour. If I can breathe through those 5 minutes, I have honored where I am today and still made some form of progress. And I think that's so important for us to remember with ourselves, to remember with others, is meet people where they are. Don't force it.
Yeah.
Make an invitation.
Hmm.
Be inviting, be welcoming, be consistent, be safe. But we don't need to push in
Exactly.
any way.
Yeah. I think that that comes back to making sure that you're giving people power within their choice.
Yeah. So maybe if you could speak a little bit to that. Let's see. Well, let's see if this comes out. I'm just kind of curious. If you've got a room of, you're in front of 600, 700, 800 educators and parents,
Hmm.
and you've got the microphone, and they get to say, okay, here you go. You've got, 5 minutes, whatever you want to cover with these parents and educators to give them the words of wisdom that are going to help them work and meet their children and connect with their children in a
Hmm.
completely different way. What do you want to tell them?
Whew, that's a tough question. I think first and foremost, and I come back to this in every single one of my workshops, any single interaction that I have with students or I'm sorry, with teachers or parents, is how have you established a safe, trusting relationship with the child that you're working with? Have you put the time into that? Do you know what they need to feel safe, to feel heard, to feel comfortable? And do they know what they can expect from you to feel that? And same thing, what do you expect from them? So that there's this reciprocal relationship. And when you can invite them into that, they feel more invested in that relationship as well. I think so often in parenting, and I can't speak to that necessarily since I'm not a parent, but just from what I know and from what I know as an educator, there's this power dynamic. So how can we shift that from I'm in charge, and you're going to listen, to I'm here to listen to you, I belong, you belong.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite things to kind of frame, or my favorite sayings to frame any conversation. And I say it to myself all the time before I do something that is in front of a lot of people. I belong, you belong, this space is for us. So first and foremost, how are you creating that space that cultivates a sense of belonging, that cultivates a sense of trust, that's truly a space to build a relationship?
Yeah.
And I think that can transform anything.
I absolutely, it's interesting again. Another individual I spoke with recently, Dr. Michael Reichert, describes exactly what you were just describing: is how do you create that container,
Yeah.
that space for your children to be who they are,
Hmm.
to learn what they need to learn, probably more on their own than you would care to admit
Yeah.
as a parent. But it's how we learn. Reflect back on our childhoods. There
Hmm.
was a lot of experiencing going on as opposed to just following what we were told.
Hmm.
And how do you create a container, though, that they feel safe to explore that, and they
Hmm.
feel connected enough to you that they can come and have some of those conversations of what they're going through and how
Right.
they need to express themselves and what they may need from you
Yeah.
at any given time is an important space to create. I guess. Sorry, was there something you wanted to add to
No.
that?
No,
Okay, because
that's great.
the last question that I just wanted to ask is, it's such a wonderful phrase. I've heard it before, but the way that it gets explained is always different. Peaceful warrior.
Hmm.
That there's a duality that is presented seemingly within that phrase. And
Hmm.
so I'm just curious what it means to you and why you specifically chose peaceful warriors as the namesake that
Sure.
you wanted people to identify with.
Yeah. So I think when we think about the society, the culture that we are now living in, that is a part of our life that's unavoidable. Um, a lot of it is chaos. There's chaos on the outside, there's chaos on the inside. And while that may or may not change, there's very little control that we have over the outside world and what's happening. Um, I think that there is a sense of a warrior that you have to be, this outer peace to navigate that world, but you can do it in a calm, peaceful manner, and you can create that sense of peace from within. And you use that sense of being a warrior to take that out into the world with you, whether that's to share it with somebody else, whether it's to, for yourself, just to use to operate on a day-to-day basis. But ideally what we see is that we then create this community, this culture shift where things can be from a more peaceful place. It's less combative, it's less chaotic. It again comes back more to that sense of belonging, that sense of connection.
Yeah. Chelsea, I want to thank you for being here on One Idea Way. And I want to thank you for the work that you are doing with Project Peaceful Warriors. It's making an extraordinary, meaningful difference to New Orleans. And I hope to see it spread well beyond the boundaries of New Orleans as well.
Thank you so much, Luke. I really appreciate it. It was great speaking with you.
Thank you. I think just maybe the one thing that I would wrap up with, even just for my own thought, is along this line of being a peaceful warrior in today's society. To me, that means that when we stand up for what it is we believe in, when we stand up for what we believe is maybe a better way to do things, let's be sure that we stand up with peace. Let's stand up with love. Let's stand up with consciousness. Let's stand up with the very means that create the ends that we wish to see. And so, as always, I want to thank you for tuning in to One Idea Way. And until next time, continue to enjoy the journey. Check out IPEC's coach training program at ipeccoaching.com/OIA. And of course, to find out about all the conversations, events, gatherings, all the things that we've got upcoming, then head on over to oneideaaway.com/community. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have, please do us the favor of subscribing, reviewing the show, as well as sharing insights or comments that stood out for you in this episode.